Hello and welcome. Today I have the great privilege of speaking to Dame Judith Hackitt to talk about the Building Safety Act, about quality, about our responsibility in the built environment, but most importantly and uniquely for Dame Judith, this is an opportunity to talk directly to the people that influence the quality of our buildings, and that is you. It's you, and the reason we're standing down all of our sites today is so that you can hear the message directly from the person that is regulating our industry and the reasons behind why that is so important for us going forward. The reason why the quality of what we do, the legacy that we leave, the records that we keep are absolutely intrinsic to the ability for us as a family-owned business to really survive and prosper into the future and really be the best that we can be within the built environment. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the next half an hour. Good morning and welcome. Welcome, Dame Judith. Welcome to Wates. Just indicating how important the Building Safety Act and quality is to us as a business. Our original concept was to address the operational cohort, but the business as a whole. For those that don't know me, my name is Tant, Managing Director of the construction business, and that's responsible for something in the order of £1 billion a year turnover of construction right the way across certainly England and part of Wales. And in terms of ongoing turnover and workload, we're currently looking at a pipeline of work that's in excess of about £6 billion worth of work over the coming years. So from our perspective, a significant part of the built environment, and being a family-owned business, we've just celebrated 125 years in business. So the ongoing legacy of what we leave and what we deliver in terms of built environment is supremely important to us as we work through the current projects, and we'll talk about some of that today. Dame Judith, just in terms of background, can you just tell us a little bit about you, about your experience, and how you came to be chair of the Hackitt inquiry post Grenfell?
Okay, well, my background is chemical engineering, not civil engineering. I studied chemical engineering at university. I spent more than 2 decades working in the petrochemical industry. In the early 2000s, I got involved with the health and safety regulator, first of all as a non-exec, and I then became chair of the Health and Safety Executive, which I did for nearly a decade. And that all preceded me being asked to do the review of the regulatory system post the disaster which happened at Grenfell, which was, of course, separate from the public inquiry. So the public inquiry was looking at the detail of what happened at Grenfell. The question that was posed to me was one of what went wrong with the regulatory system. And so I think, if you link that to my background, why me? Well, because I had spent nearly a decade chairing a regulatory body and knew what good regulation looked like. But also with an engineering background from a different sector, I was able to bring some of my knowledge and experience, but without being steeped in the practices of the industry, so I could bring a sense of objectivity and independence.
Excellent. And the kind of shock of Grenfell as a catalyst to the business. So we experienced some of that ourselves. So Colin, we as Wates, and in terms of temporary structures, were involved in the immediate aftermath of Grenfell. Mm-hmm. So going through, appreciating that it's from the regulatory side, but the shock and the stimulus that Grenfell provided to us as an industry, what was the biggest thing that surprised you when you started on that journey?
It was a real journey of discovery for me. So when I was asked to do the review, I didn't really have to think twice about whether or not to take it on. Quite a few people said, I wouldn't do this if I were you. And I said, no, I must do this because I am keen from a personal perspective to understand what's gone wrong here, because I shared that shock that everyone felt when we saw what happened at Grenfell. The first shock was that it could happen at all, and how come our regulatory system did allow this to happen. So that was the first one for me. But then I was surprised when I talked to people in all parts of not just the industry, but people in the fire service, people who were involved in design, quality control, and every one of them seemed to be saying to me, we kind of knew something would go wrong one day, but we never thought it would be this bad. So that sense of everyone already knew there was a problem, but no one was speaking up about it surprised me. And then when I started to ask questions around, so how does this work? How do you do this? How do you keep records of that? And it seemed like the answer to the question all the time was, that's somebody else's job, not mine. And so there was this really strong sense of, who owns this? Who feels responsible? And I couldn't get my head around the fact that no one seemed to feel that sense of overall responsibility.
And just expanding on that a little bit, do you think that goes from an ownership side of buildings or from a contracting side of buildings as you work your way through that thread? We'll come back to threads later, but
I think it's a function of the fragmentation in the industry.
yeah.
And I think it's actually baked in to the way you work these days, you know, whether that's contractually or the extent to which you subcontract and subcontract. Throughout that whole process, there is a diffusion of responsibility to the point where people have this sense of, well, I just do my bit. And we've lost that sense of, but every one of those bits is really important, and any one person can damage the integrity of a building if they don't do what they're doing correctly and to the right standards.
If you trace that back into, because one of the key findings is around competency and around one of our obligations is to prove competency of people that work on our buildings and also design the buildings. How does that thread go through the kind of skills base and competency within the industry?
I think design is a different matter. You know, there you really do have to have people with the right level of competency involved, who understand not just what they're allowed to do, and this is a really important issue for me. I've seen so much gaming of the system, of people saying, but the rules say I can do that, or the rules don't say I can't do that, so I'll assume I can. We need people who are really not just competent, I think, in design and the people who are responsible for construction, but people who genuinely care about whether this is the right thing to do and whether we're building the right quality. I think when you get down to some of the more detailed levels and the lower skills level, yes, we need to raise the competence of people over the long haul. But in the meantime, I recognise that you face all these challenges of labour shortages and skill shortages and so on. And having spent as many years as I have in industry, I know that the answer, therefore, is if you have to use people who have a lower level of skill than you would want or a lower level of competence than you would ideally want, then the answer is you've got to supervise them more. Yeah. And you've got to assure yourself that they understand their bit, they know how to perform that, and that you are assuring that they are doing it right. And that can only come through supervision.
So in our world, that is around putting people to work in the right way, yes, inducting them correctly, yep, onto our sites. So that is something we hold very dear. But a message, one of the key messages for us is about that putting people to work correctly.
Yes, yes.
We also touched as we walked around, we're at Canada Water today, so we're very grateful to British Land for giving us their facilities today. Mm-hmm. Probably our most recently completed job, which is a mock-up of what we're going to be providing through the flats here. We spoke about one of the responses being around modern methods of construction, yes, and off-site manufacture. Would that be one of the things that you feel responds strongly to that skills challenge?
Indeed. I've said throughout the discussions I've had with people since I did my review, there is no way that regulation should stand in the way of innovation. Innovation is key in every sector, and this one more so, I would say, than most, because I think there are some aspects of technology that I'm astounded you haven't adopted yet, like digital, which I'm sure we will come on to. But having said that, I think being able to innovate is great, but with being innovative comes responsibility, and that is responsibility for innovating in a way that enhances the quality and leads to better outcomes. And it's that outcome you've always got to bear in mind. So I am absolutely sure that by going to off-site modularised construction of some parts of complex buildings, that is a way of addressing the on-site skills shortage, but it's also a way of assuring quality.
And by innovation, I guess we're talking about innovating against tested techniques. So we're not innovating for the sake of innovating. We're making sure that...
Innovation isn't about making it up as you go along.
No.
Innovation is about coming up with smart new methods that you properly evaluate and then implement, yes.
And I guess the background in the petrochemical industry, that is certainly one environment where you definitely can't innovate as you go along.
Exactly. You know, there is a need, and for me, that's some of the experience that I brought to this, I think, which is when you come up with new ideas in this sector, who challenges that? How does it get reviewed? How does it get recorded? And there's a lot of ground to make up in terms of becoming better at formalising some of those processes, I think.
We touched on the challenges for us around digital. So one of our messages around putting people to work in the right way. The other challenge is about digital. I think we've just seen with some of the things we're doing on site, we are embracing golden thread with technology. But the question just around golden thread and exploring the golden thread of information, what is the key aspects of demonstrating that we build it right that are most important to you?
The key aspect is first of all recognising the importance of what it is you're doing. You're not just doing a job, you are building offices, homes, whatever it is for people to use. And to me, it's absolutely fundamental that those buildings need to be safe, they need to be fit for purpose. And if you look at the length of time those buildings are going to be in operation, if the people who are part of that much longer time span, because your footprint is over a very short period of time, then you hand it over to someone else. If you can't tell them what it is that you've built and what the key factors are, safety factors particularly around that building, how are they ever going to manage it throughout its lifespan unless you're able to hand over that package of information that says this is what you've got and this is what's important about it.
And for us, we feel that as well. So we often think of practical completion as the date where we hand a building over to someone else. And I think as leaders of the business, as business owners, you recognise more the legacy of leaving that building. But as you're right, there are a series of alterations that happen to buildings in time that mean that without proper information, it's very hard.
Absolutely. Unless you know what are the really important features, then it's very easy for some of those important features to get compromised unwittingly during the life cycle of the building.
And you wrote a really interesting paper recently around did you sleep well? I guess that this strikes at that did you sleep well around what you do today and the impact that has into the future.
Yeah, so that the paper that I wrote entitled Did You Sleep Well is about ethics, and it's about ethics in engineering, and about that it's not what the rules say and whether you complied with the rules that actually matters. It's about living with yourself and whether you did the best you could do and you did a good job, and you can feel that sense of I did what I could. And so it's not just about doing your own job well, but for me there is also an element in that on being prepared to speak up when you see things that others are doing that concerns you.
From the Grenfell inquiry and the regulatory, one is regulation, one is culture to be able to do that. How, in breeding and encouraging that open culture, it is about encouraging that ability to stand up and speak about things that are not correct.
Yeah. I was very clear in my review. So it started out as a regulatory review, as you said. So what went wrong with the regulatory system? But first of all, the regulatory system is about more than the rules. It's also about how effective is the regulator. And I had some things to say about the effectiveness of the way the regulation was being applied. Yeah. But also about the culture of the industry. Because at the end of the day, regulation is there to drive the right behaviours. And we've already talked about what I call this race to the bottom, gaming of the system and so on. So the whole system has to change, including that culture. Yeah. Bearing in mind, as I've already said, that I spent a decade as chair of the Health and Safety Executive. And what I saw during that decade was this industry move from a position where safety of the workforce was like always in a too difficult box and a sense of, well, this is a dangerous industry. These things happen, to an industry that has embraced the need for safety during construction. This next journey now is about the safety of all of those people who will live in, work in, use the buildings that you are building. And in lots of ways, it's a journey that I've watched other industries go through. The chemical industry that I was part of got very focused on site safety and then had to turn its attention to the environmental fate of the products that we were producing. There's a parallel there between it. You've got to look at that whole thing and be satisfied that what you're doing is not just ensuring the safety of those who work for you, but those for whom you're doing the work.
Yeah, and certainly I spoke during our recent roadshows around effectively having 4 standards. One is looking after ourselves as people in the first instance, and then the environment that we create in terms of our offices. But then I've spoke a lot to our particularly operational staff, but to the business around the safety, which we've made huge advances over the last years, but really making the quality of what we produce really be on the same par of what we do, and that attention to detail every day. So the safety of the residents of our buildings in whatever way, shape or form, for us is about the quality and the information that we can give that says that we've left it in the best state that we can.
Yes. Indeed, and I think what I would add to that is anyone who thinks safety and quality are separate needs to go away and have a think about that, because for me they are inextricably linked and always have been. And when I hear people say, as I've heard in the last 12 months, people say, this is a Building Safety Act, not a Building Quality Act. It's both, and anyone who thinks that they can just confine this to safety without embracing that need to build quality as well is not getting the message. That's what I mean about the culture. Move away from this, strict interpretation of the rules and embrace the intent.
And I'm so pleased you've said that, because that is a lot of the message, that the kind of longevity and the legacy of what we leave is intrinsic to that message. And I guess recognising the environment, we live in a often cost-driven business. We live in a programme-driven business, which are largely both very short-term. What is the key message that you would drive out of that around culture of what they do?
My key message to everyone is to try and make this personal. So whatever you're doing, whatever part of this complex jigsaw, which is the building, whichever piece of that jigsaw it is that you are putting in place, recognise, first of all, that it is part of this big jigsaw puzzle, and any one piece can impact the integrity of the whole. So recognise how important your bit is, first. And secondly, just imagine that someone in your family is going to live or work in this building once it's complete.
Yeah.
Would you be happy for them to do that? And if not, what are you going to do about it?
And our work goes into schools, it goes into leisure centres, goes into MPs' accommodation.
Yeah.
So I guess the same applies in all of those environments.
It would appear that the greatest accelerator of culture change is learning from disasters. And I've seen that happen now in the chemical industry, the oil and gas industry, and now it's happening in construction. You know, Grenfell is this industry's Piper Alpha, and it needs to change forever. Not just the regulation, but the culture of the industry. One other thing I've learned over the last 5 years of doing this review is just how important the construction industry and the built environment in particular is to society as a whole. You know, it's an enormous responsibility that you carry, providing homes and offices and schools and hospitals for all of us as society. And I think it's time to feel that responsibility and own that moral responsibility to provide people with things that they can have trust and faith in.
That's brilliant, and that is a really strong message to send out to our teams, our sites, the people who work within Wates. So say thank you very much for your time. Please.